The Talk Station presents Faith Matters, a look at contemporary stories and issues from a faith perspective. While this is a pre-recorded show, we are interested in your ideas, comments, and questions, and we urge you to email them to faithmatters@thetalkstation.com.
Give me faith, trust what you say, that you're good and your love is great. I'm broken inside, I give you my life.
And now on the Talk Station, Faith Matters.
And welcome to another program of Faith Matters here on the Talk Station. I'm Ben Ball, pastor of Broad Creek United Methodist Church. Reverend Robert Cornegie joins us, who's the associate pastor of Chapel by the Sea in Emerald Isle. And Dr. Robert Wilson, Dr. Bob, joins us, who's the author of Nullifying God. And good day, gentlemen.
Good day.
Good morning. Using the term
Actually,
loosely.
if you want to be that formal, good day to you,
Good
sir.
day to you, sir. All right, let's talk first of all about the tragedy that's happened in Florida. This is just a terrible thing, and as we record this on Thursday, the day after, it is a very sad day, and it's a very difficult subject to talk about. 17 students killed at a high school in Florida by allegedly by a 19-year-old former student who had been expelled for disciplinary reasons, and now we're faced with this tragedy where you have kids, parents, and even elsewhere, not just there, but everywhere now, who have that one more notch of fear, one more notch of anxiety. And now for our part as pastors and as lay people, we say one more question about their faith. Mm-hmm. And so I just wanted to start with that. We don't really have an article to go on for this, but we know that some churches are holding vigils. And of course, we talk about our prayer life and our prayer response, and hopefully we're all including that in our prayers. But let's also talk about how we relate to this. Robert, this is a case where people will say, why? They ask this question, why? Why does this happen? And where is God here? Mm-hmm. And how do we present this to our kids to make them feel like the school is safe, or at least they are?
Yeah, sadly, churches are getting experienced in this in our own right. I mean, we have people that are coming into churches now, and
the one in Texas recently,
gunmen coming in and doing.
We're doing security reviews.
Yeah,
security
exactly. We're in the process right now of reviewing our security measures that we put in place a couple of years ago, and re-examining that. We've just hired a part-time police officer. Mm-hmm. to be at our church on Sunday mornings, because you just don't know. We take it very seriously that we are to edify, build up the body of Christ and protect it that's coming together. And so we take this very seriously as a church. But and it's interesting too that's a position that I believe we need to take with school systems. And I believe it's important that the parents are talking to the school boards, the school administrations, and all of that on saying, what are you doing? What are your protective measures for our children? Are they adequate? Are they inadequate? Can we assume, because nothing has happened in our schools, that nothing will happen in our schools?
Yeah, bad assumption to make.
It's a terrible assumption to make. And
I was going to say, you cannot make that assumption, because that you're projecting, oh, well, we're going to be fine, we're going to be fine. Well, you can't make that assumption, and that leaves a whole aura of uncertainty and fear.
That's probably the most horrifying part of it, isn't it? Although it was interesting, I was listening to the radio this morning, and as I was coming in, and they were interviewing some of the kids, and the commentator was saying, these kids are talking like cops now.
They're remarkably calm.
And the number, saying like, he shot, a whole clip full of rounds. I mean, that's
military talk,
gun range talk.
Yeah.
I mean, these kids, and so it was almost like it's, matter of fact, they've got it fits in their vocabulary now. They have a vocabulary to be able to talk about these things. I mean, there are obviously those that are just shattered. I mean, literally lives. They saw people die right in front of them, friends and schoolmates. And so, it's horrifying. So Yeah, I think for the parent and for the clergy, as those who are leaders in our church, and whether you're
And many of
a
us
clergy
parents
or
too.
not,
Yeah.
if you're involved in a church, you're a leader in that process. We need to be able to talk to our people and the community at large about this. And what are the realistic? Look, evil exists. We have this problem called evil. And we like to pretend it's not normative. But you look everywhere else in the world, and it's pretty normative. It's there. And we, as believers, as Christians, we believe we actually have an enemy that goes around seeking to steal and kill and destroy. And so we have to use wisdom, and we have to have the ability to discern what's going on in our community.
Well, we had an interview on our morning show this week on Coastal Daybreak about screen time, about cell phones, et cetera, and things that we're all guilty of. And I brought up the fact that and we're talking about it with our teens, but all of us have our phone within reach. So this is not just that kind of issue, but how we have developed in this society from a variety of factors, not just that, an idea that we are the center of the universe, and that everything that we do, we control. We control when we take in entertainment. We control what we do, or factors. We control who we are with and who we like and don't like. We don't answer the phone unless we know who it is. Even that. So our idea of this nature of the universe leaves out God's role as the center of our universe. And so the more we go in that direction with that, without having proper communication as adults, as leaders in our church, as other people, about how this is a tool, this is not your universe. This is our thought process needs to go beyond ourselves. And we need to think about that. And that brings in the community and how we act in communion with others. So this is the case we were talking today about. If your child is a person who is perhaps a loner in the school, seek out someone to be with them. Seek out someone that will sit with them at lunch, so they're not feeling like they are alone, and therefore they can act in any way they wish towards the rest of the universe.
Yeah.
Well, I think one of the things, too, you had mentioned self. Now, I'm going to read you a quote, and then I'm going to give you a date of the quote. There is nothing miraculous about the things we can explain, underlined we. We command what we are able to explain. Consequently, it is natural to seek to explain. The focus in that quote is on the self. Over 100 years ago. That's Oswald Chambers.
Right.
And the thing that gets me about that is that this has been a perennial problem. And you were mentioning, Robert, about evil. Evil is there. It is real, and it will take advantage of it'll wedge into every situation that it possibly can. Now, that doesn't help. That doesn't help the people who were involved in the Florida shooting. But it helps us understand what's going on out there. We have a real discrete enemy that is going to take advantage of every situation that it can. And when I was growing up, my dad put me in an NRA course, and we were taught safety, 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 safety. That gun that we shot, targets, that's not a toy. But I see a thing today where kids play games that are just, they blow away people. Movies are the same
They're
way.
desensitized to
Yeah,
that.
Yeah,
the
they're
glorification of violence.
And it's just so they don't have a thought process. But the tragedy is that translates for somebody who is disturbed, like this 19-year-old, that translates into the impetus to go ahead and do something like this without even thinking about it. And that's the way the other school shootings have been as well. That doesn't lessen the tragedy. That doesn't lessen the loss.
But we are tasked, though, with in terms of lessening that loss is coming to our friends and our family and our victims and those who feel victimized by it, whether they were there or not, about saying, those, especially in the faith community, say, how are you going to use this now? What are you going to do to glorify God out of this?
Yeah.
And is that going to be to build up a stronger community? Is that going to be to take somebody under your wing, to help lead somebody to a faith life? Will you do that now that you weren't doing before? That maybe that will flip a switch with somebody who could be that next 19-year-old.
That's a great point. This requires a situational awareness that most of us don't have in this. I'm being generally speaking.
That's true.
Is that when we put our kids on the bus or we drop them off at the school, what is our assumption? Is that is a safe place. Mm-hmm. And that that organization, in this case a school, it has measures in place to protect. And the way the school, we're going to be talking about
school
this.
Or a church or
right,
a hospital.
That is to me it's as a member of a community. The education system in the United States begins in the local community.
Yeah, absolutely.
Local school board. I mean, they make decisions about this, so we have influence into that. And so I think we need a review on every level of what we're doing in our schools to make them safe.
Some different eyes that aren't necessarily the security experts, but are people that are wise, that can insert some wisdom.
Yeah.
We'll have more to come in a moment here on Faith Matters on the talk station, FM 107 and AM 1240.
I don't know if it...
Welcome back to Faith Matters here on the talk station, FM 107 and AM 1240. And I'm Ben Ball, along with Dr. Bob Wilson, also Reverend Robert Cornegie, as we were talking in our first segment about the Florida shooting. One of the elements that came out of that, and again, it's so new that we don't have a lot of information yet, but one of the elements was that he had been undergoing some kind of treatment for mental concerns. We don't want to necessarily say mental disabilities or whatever, because we don't know what any diagnoses are. Mm-hmm. But we understand that was part of one of the news articles, and it's been part of many of the shooting articles that we have seen, and many other issues that we come across with. In fact, in our churches, we have many people that have gone through clinical depression or going through that now. Other mental disorders, whether some OCD kind of things or on up to schizophrenia. We have lots of things that are happening in our church, and we may not even be aware of.
That's exactly right.
And so some of this has to do with. I'll go back to something we have talked about actually years ago, and that's parish nursing, where we became more familiar with both the physical and mental state of our church, of our congregation, as well as the spiritual state.
Well, and they're all three related, aren't they?
Yeah.
I mean, that's one of the
all
things.
part of creation, right?
Yeah, we can't say it's just a physical, it's just a mental, or it's just a emotional, or it's just a spiritual. It really, all three kind of cross over.
Well, it's an integration process that all three are integrated. Just like life itself, everything impacts on everything else.
Exactly.
Well, just as Christ said, all the parts of the body.
Yes, exactly.
It's integrated.
So and as I was mentioning, I'm working with a family right now that are working through a bulimia situation with a young teenager. And we're kind of talking through the process, and they're trying to get help. And the last option on their list of causes and remedies is that mental health side of it. They want to make it either a physical or a emotional thing, rather than not even bringing in the spiritual side of it,
right?
And trying to work through what is the worldview, how does this child, and this is a child, young teenager, how does she relate to the world around her from a spiritual point of view? and trying to plumb that depth and talk to her in those contexts and put all of that together so that she can get some help. But it's just
very difficult for individuals. I know a lady that stood up and offered testimony about her own depression in our church, and I just applauded her just because she faced what could be a potential stigma.
That's
within the
it,
church.
isn't it?
And here it is in that case, and so many other cases too, where a parent may not want to see that their child is going to get labeled this way because labels tend to stick.
Yeah, they do.
And that's a fault in our society as well. But I think we also have some other things too. As far as mental health issues, we have it's either a stigma, or we must figure out how to mainstream everyone.
Right.
So it seems like there's not a kind of let's live this and let's try to make this part of our life, not a separate thing, and not either excluded or included completely.
Well, it seems as though in a case like what you're talking about, Robert, is that the parents involved are papering over this aspect of it, and it is a form of denial, thinking about it, they may feel that it reflects back on them in some way, and of course they don't want that. But the focus should be on this young woman to help her go through that, and if that's not being achieved, then there's got to be some pride in there as well. But the whole thing is, how do you get? That's a very difficult thing. I understand that bulimia is not something that just you can get rid of overnight. There's a whole bunch of issues involved in that. There's body image. There's a number of things that are going on about how that young woman sees herself.
That's exactly right.
But the thing is, that's the focus can't be on the parents, it can't be on the stigma, it can't be on the school. How do you save that young girl?
Well, we're literally having to go through the process of like you troubleshoot, of troubleshooting process. You look for the obvious, you eliminate the simple things first, and looking at it from a dietetic, nutritional, all those ways, and moving towards there's a problem here, it's the same way with dealing with bipolar issues, and sometimes there's a chemical thing going on. I mean, you just can't,
and it can be exacerbated by the by other things that happen, familial things that maybe happen in a family, happen in relationships, and they might trigger responses. So, and that's there's so many aspects to this. We're just barely scraping a fingernail across part of it. There's so many. And if we relate this back to the Florida shooting there too, you've got broken family issues from being adopted. Both his adopted parents have died. He's living with friends, then had to move to somebody else because they were afraid of him. And so there's so many other triggering issues that may lie behind than that diagnosis.
Yeah. No, it's true. And as clergy, as people that are reaching out, trying to help people through these difficult times, I think we have a voice in this. We need to be at the table, and that's one of the challenges. I think the public education system has resources for these kind of things. They have counselors in all of the areas, not including spiritual counseling.
Right.
So that's kind of been eliminated from the formula, and so we have to be able to,
walk alongside,
initiate contact on these things to be able to help them in that process, because that has, if your basis foundational view of the world is incorrect, I don't care what you do with we learn this in missions. You can go into a village and do all kinds of stuff, show them how to plant corn and all kinds of things. But if they don't get it, that God wants them, has an intention for them,
to live life and live it abundantly.
Yeah, if they don't get that, then they're short-term
Right.
things that you're doing. It's not a lasting change.
Well, Bob, as a scientist, you're used to a scientific method. You're used to establishing a hypothesis and maybe creating a couple of theories out of a premise, and then gathering evidence, operating with experiments and conclusions. And so often, I think in our society, we want to take one thing, and we want to point to that one thing as being the key. And
Well, I think that the problem is that the complexity of so many issues is amazing, and people just want to solve it right now. They want to, here's one-time answer, take a pill, you're done. But when you're dealing with the whole person, it's an entirely different issue. And I was thinking that this poor girl, she has tremendous needs. What needs does she have that can be addressed? How do you help her overcome this problem she has? And then there's the spiritual aspect. Does she feel loved? Does she know love? And I'm not saying the parents don't love her. That's not what I'm saying at all. But does she feel loved? Does she feel grounded in something? And that's where God would come in.
The value.
To say, look, there's somebody here who really wants you to grow up and to know him and to love him and to be able to serve him, but he loves you. Does she have an awareness of that? Is that important to her? I don't know. That's just a question.
Some of this, though, is grounded. I don't mean just in this case, because that's a personal thing with you and this family. But I mean that sometimes we want so much to find a source of blame. Whether it's in a shooting, whether it's in a depression, or we want to find some source of blame. If we could only find that one single source of blame, then we could answer that.
Yeah. Obviously, we look for we have microwave ovens for a reason. We don't want to wait to have to cook the meal.
That's right.
We want immediate. Me first and more.
Yes.
Is kind of the creed of our culture, and so when we see something like this, we want that instant fix. How do we do it? And for some, you turn to the government, and that the government has to do this.
Well,
it has a part in it.
Yeah, Marco Rubio says if we could have he's not the only one that said it today, but it says if there was a law that would fix this, I'd vote for it.
Yeah.
But there's not a law that's going to fix this.
That's exactly right. And so, the complexity of this, we're not good at this. We're just not good at this. I mean, it breaks our hearts to see, in this case, the shooting incident in Florida. I mean, it's tragic. This is a tragedy. There will be lives affected for generations because of this.
And you can't tell where that's going to fall out. The thing is, you're talking about complexity, Robert, but think of it this way. It's a fabric. It's not just a pinpoint thing that you can go and identify and take care of, but it's something where there's a lot of interacting factors, and the patience involved in dissecting that all out and trying to correct, heal, or whatever.
We'll have more to come in a moment here on Faith Matters on the talk station FM 107 and AM 1240. I'm Ben Ball, along with Reverend Robert Corning and Dr. Bob Wilson. We'll have more in just a moment. Hey, welcome back to the program. Good to have you with us here on Faith Matters on the talk station. I'm Ben Ball, along with the Reverend Robert Cornigan and Dr. Bob Wilson. And our next article that we want to take up is the Associated Press article that came out on Thursday morning about an action this week by the Cumberland County school system. And let me read part of this, if not all of this article. It's short. It says a large school system in North Carolina has voted to get rid of its sex education program, which some parents said was too graphic. Media outlets reported that Cumberland County School Board voted Tuesday to ditch the Get Real sex education program. It started in 2016 and returned to a program it first used in 2009. Parents complained about the Get Real program in October, and Acting Superintendent Tim Kinlaw suspended the program while it was being reviewed by a panel of teachers and parents. A committee recommended last week that the program be replaced. Kelly Bullard of Wade said he didn't like the program because it stressed risk reduction instead of risk avoidance, but Aaron Stevens of Fayetteville said the sex education program should teach up-to-date and evidence-based information. The conflict, Robert, you've been involved with for a while.
Yeah, well, this is one of the areas, through the Coastal Pregnancy Care Center, we developed back in the 90s a program to respond to, you can look at it almost decade by decade from the 70s when the
free
Roe v.
love
Wade and all of that took place, and suddenly abortion became legal in our nation from the federal level, and all the state governments had to adjust. And so now and into the 80s, that's when in the 80s was when the pregnancy care center, pregnancy resource centers started developing, because it had been a decade basically. And in that decade, we had seen this spike in young people being justified, being encouraged to get involved in having a sexual life, and the consequences through the sexually transmitted diseases and the pregnancies and all that was going on with that. So, and there was no network that existed prior to that to handle this group of people. And so
to give them alternatives.
Yeah, and so out of that need, resources started being developed. In the 90s, it went into that they were coming in and they had their understanding of reproductive health and just basic sexual health was not being addressed. And so we started then with our lifeguard program, and that was when we were able to move into the public and private schools with a abstinence education program. It was also a character building program. And when we went into the schools, we really didn't have a religious basis, but it was more on character development, making good decisions. Here are some of the challenges you're going to be faced with. Here's the way to work through it, and those kind of things. It's a very effective program, and we saw that the statistics for Carteret County suddenly started changing from the norm of the state when you compared our statistics with the state statistics and those other counties that were implementing these same kind of programs. And we saw on the state level that the state was recognizing that there were improvements in lowering the number of unwed
teen pregnancies.
Teen pregnancy, as well as STDs and other things, sexually transmitted diseases. That they changed their standards on the statewide level. The Department of Public Instruction changed their standards,
which is still the standard, right?
Exactly, that standard still remains. And but then in 2000. We implemented into the 2000s, we implemented a program that was to help in the post-abortion process, and then with fathers and training them, character training and parenting training. And so we've seen this sort of development of programs. The Cumberland, 3 years ago, I think it was 3 years ago, 2 years ago perhaps, I don't have it right on top of my head.
2016 for Cumberland County, but around that 2015,
around that same time,
period.
There was a major shift. By that time, federal funds now coming from the federal government started coming into the huge amount of funds coming into the states, pushing this Get Real program, which is there are two classifications now we use. It's called sexual risk avoidance, and that's abstinence. Just don't do it.
Right.
Until marriage.
Here's how you teach that.
That's right. That's what we were teaching. The program that came in that had been called Safe Sex before, now they changed it to sexual risk reduction rather than avoidance. And that's actually using contraceptives. So be sexually active, just use contraceptives in the process. And so that's the push. And that's why these parents push back on it, because they were teaching them how to use contraceptives and to not wait, to go ahead and be sexually active in middle school and in high school.
Oh, some of these funds were being funneled through other groups to help do that.
That's right. There's a big group called Shift, and and it stands for some things, but it's actually funded through Planned Parenthood that is sponsoring these programs. Because the reality is kids may be taught about contraceptives, but in the heat of the moment, generally speaking, they don't use them. And so now we have this whole STD, and we're starting to see the trends. So in 2016, we were basically asked to not teach in the schools anymore, and they in Carteret County, and they brought in this other program. And so we've been pushing against that. So the Cumberland County is actually the results of a grassroots, parent-led, and some educators as well. It's called North Carolina Protect Our Students movement. It's a movement. It's a grassroots movement. And we've had success in Onslow County as well as in now Cumberland County in reversing this trend towards liberal. You know, politically, there's a lag between when administrations change.
Sure.
And so we've seen this lag, and now it's starting. You know, the current administration is very pro-life.
Well, in this, I applaud the superintendent. The superintendent gets hired by the school board. You know,
that's right.
I applaud the superintendent in Cumberland County who suspended the program while they examined these issues.
Yeah, what a great thing.
They didn't just replace the program and then kind of have a few meetings about it.
Well, there was a lot of pressure on that school board. You know, from the parents.
And the school board's elected.
Yeah. And so, you know, they are elected to represent their communities, and the community started pushing back on this. And so he responded to that pressure.
Now, what about the charge here, though, about teaching up-to-date evidence-based information? That's still
I was
not
going to ask about that. What do they mean by evidence-based?
That's still not avoided here.
Of course not. No, but that's the lingo. That's the current lingo that they use to say that it's all science-based. But it really, if you scratch the surface a little bit of these things, these are ideologies. These are not science-based decisions. That's like abortion. I mean, that you said it last week. A human being exists at conception.
Yes.
Independent of the parent, of the mother.
Yep.
It's a different being.
Yes.
Human being. And so, you know, they ignore the science in these things. And that's much of what's going on here. They have an agenda. And their agenda is for Planned Parenthood, it's a market. And they're looking at opportunities to use their resources in this middle school, high school, college area. And so we're in a battle. And we're in battle in Carteret County right here.
I think one of the things, too, if we're talking evidence-based, that turns the thing into something which is impersonal and very sterile and not full of life. You know, one of the things that I've heard over the years is that when two people have sex, a man and a woman, you know, there is a bond formed at that time if they are both inexperienced. There is an intimacy formed at that time. And if it's just one to another, to another, to another, to another, that intimacy just goes.
Right.
Sex becomes objectified. It becomes an activity. And where's the love? Where's the respect? Where's that closeness?
That's kind of the cultural norm, is to make it an activity.
Yes.
Not an intimate act of a love.
Yeah, and of course that gets rid of love, and that gets rid of God. You know, that's part of the secularization of the society we have.
Well, it's based on a very faulty premise. And the fault of the premise is that you can develop ways in which having sex has no consequences. Seriously.
No, I know you are, but it's like that's foolish.
There is this. I mean, and it's exactly foolishness, but it's that wickedness of the heart, that dreams us up. That I want to live a consequence-free life, and that's impossible. It doesn't exist, and particularly when you're talking about something so precious as the creation of a new life. And everything in life tries to go to life. I mean, look, we're transforming now. You look at the trees around here. What are they doing? They're starting to bud. We're going. I mean, life will return. It is hard to stop it. Right. And the lie is that you can have sex and not have consequences from that sex. And it's impossible.
And the consequences can be physical, they can be emotional, they can be mental, they can damage spiritual, damage the potential relationships in the future. I mean, the consequences go on and on and on and on. It's not just isolated to one thing.
Exactly.
We'll have more to come in a moment here on Faith Matters on the Talk Station. And welcome back to Faith Matters here on the Talk Station, FM 107 and AM 1240. Thanks for joining us here today. I'm Ben Ball, and along with the Reverend Robert Corning and Dr. Bob Wilson, and into our final segment here today, which we sometimes call the sign of the apocalypse. And this one may indeed qualify here. We had an incident that happened. I guess it was a couple of weeks ago. I don't have the full article up with me right now, but we know what happened. There was a Canadian Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau, a woman was giving a presentation about a charity. And she was talking about how the charity was being beneficial. And she used the phrase that charity was being beneficial to all of mankind. And he interrupted her. And this is a young, progressive, liberal Prime Minister Trudeau, and said, you should use the word peoplekind, not mankind, which there is no such word as peoplekind, but it didn't seem to bother him, mainly because, and kind of to relate to other segments here today, mainly because he just did not want to have any pretense of offense, that a term should not have any kind of offensive connotation to it.
Well, you could not speak about a gender. Right. You're being exclusive in that rather than an inclusive. And so the best he could come up with was peoplekind. Now, and of course he couldn't use personkind.
Right.
Because person has son.
Yes. Right.
And so he had to skip personkind and go to peoplekind. And everybody knows that that's just silly for a prime minister to be doing him. But look, this guy is serious. We were talking about the difference between fact-based and ideology,
yes,
and agenda. This guy is, we talk about Fruit Loop. He's pushing this thing, and he has power to do it. And so they
apparently has no patience with anything that in any way doesn't agree with that. It's going to be fait accompli, and that's the bottom line.
Well, they have in their school system, and this is getting a little bit off topic, but in Canada, I've got a friend from Canada that feeds me all this stuff. He said that they have had a long program in the summers that students go and get kind of work in the community work. And that they have funds available from the Canadian government for these organizations that hire these kids in the summer. And they're doing all kinds of great community activities, kind of like this program was talking about. And so they have to apply for these funds every year,
right,
to get it. And so now he has rewritten the whole application process, that you have to say that you agree with. They've put in the charter that what they call our Constitution. They have a charter, and their charter is that you completely embrace transgenderism as well as free,
abortion,
elective abortion.
Yes.
That's George Orwell, though. I mean, come on.
And if your organization cannot do that, you do not have access to those funds. And this is something he did.
The Catholic Church has lashed out
They're
about that.
pushing back heavily on this thing.
And said they just won't take them, and then you will not have these programs.
Yeah, exactly right. And so, we're seeing this guy abuse his power in that office. And so, but when it comes down to actually standing up, interrupting someone giving a speech and telling them to use another word, then that's how far this has gone. That's how far out this guy is. And so we really need, Americans, we need to pray for our Canadian brothers and sisters. And I'm not being facetious about this. We really do, because you think at times our government is hostile towards our faith. This is hardcore hostile in Canada. I mean, it's a serious issue up there.
Well, anybody who would take on the Catholic bishops over abortion, that is, first of all, it's stupid. But the thing is you're picking on the wrong thing there. But the view that Trudeau must have of himself is omnipotence and power. And that's scary because he's not going to brook any kind of thing where somebody is going to oppose him or question him. He has the absolute truth. And that is really scary because that can lead to all kinds of other things. So you're right, Robert. We do need to pray for our Canadian brothers and sisters.
The Ottawa Sun calls it the Justin T and his cast of all-stars comedy show that's going to be running until 2019, as they say. But this is not the Peoplekind. He says it was a bad joke, but he said plenty of other things too, like the budget will balance itself, and lots of other punchlines too. He compared ISIL fighters returning to Canada to Italian immigrants. This is someone who's completely out of touch. But the Peoplekind argument and the argument about you must accept our way, or it's our way or the highway. Even though it's counter, really, to their charter, to their constitution, is just the idea that of an elitist idea of we know better than you.
Yeah, absolutely.
We know better than you, no matter what we say.
Well, this is this thing that we're seeing has permeated our culture. Is that, and we were talking about it earlier, that government has all the answers.
But we give the government that power.
Well, some of us do.
I mean, but the early I wish I had the quotes in hand, but it was either Jefferson or Adams or one of the early people. They said you can't do that. If you do that, you're a doggone fool.
Yeah. Well, and what we're seeing is the pushback has begun in our culture, in our nation, in our society, and we need to pray that it's fascinating, isn't it, how there was I think it was 2 terms that the previous prime minister had, and he was conservative, and he implemented a lot of conservative things, and then Trudeau came in, and he started undoing everything, and we're seeing kind of the flip,
the opposite of that here
taking place in our society. And what we're not seeing is this idea that, kind of rejecting this idea that we need an intrusive government in every aspect of life to take care of us. We need to reject that. There are certain things that our government rights and responsibilities that our government had enumerated in our Constitution. In fact, it was written down what they were supposed to do. And it was limited. All the other power was in the hands of the people or individual states. Mm-hmm. And what we have seen, if the government starts absorbing power, where do they get it from? They get it from the individuals and they get it from the states. It's the only source they have. And so that's what we're seeing in our culture now.
But as churches too, in our churches and our faith across different faith communities as well, needs to retain its position of acting in tension with our governments.
That's exactly right.
Right, and so that we inform when you're off base,
right? Or
we can inform. It's not a liberal or conservative thing, but there should be an orthodoxy that sort of approaches that our government may do some things well and then some other things not so well, or at least counter to what the providence from which they drew their original ideas.
Well, that's it, because the Constitution basically says that all the powers that the government has and all the rights are derived from our Creator. And that everybody, it's like blindness, blindness, blindness. Nobody sees that. Nobody thinks it. Nobody accepts it. Because if you
deny it.
If you go to that respect, then you go back to something that Dr. Martin Luther King wrote in 1963 from the Birmingham jail, where he talks about St. Augustine and St. Thomas Aquinas and just and unjust laws.
Right.
But they all must conform. They all must conform to natural law and God's moral law. If they don't do that, it is an unjust law. He said that. I read that, and it was like, this man knows what he's talking about.
Yeah, and that was because of his training in faith and his belief system. He had a belief system based on what the founders had.
Yeah.
Their belief system was that there is an authority higher than government, and that being God Himself. And so, we have it's a wonderful time to live right now, because we have such opportunities to be able to bring people to the truth, to restore truth, and that's the way it works.
Even if it's north of the border. Right?
Yeah, even if it's north of the border. That's right. And we need to pray for all those people up there.
We laugh, but it's not funny, because
No, it isn't.
But because we're subjected to it as well. I mean,
we are.
Because we know that, frankly, our faith can be offensive to those who don't get it. As to go back kind of to your first segment, if you don't get how this can, in the bigger picture, be to your benefit, then it's hard to see it in the hour by hour parts of our life.
Yeah.
So you've got to be able to be open to the idea there's something beyond yourself and beyond your own feelings and offenses, and there's more to it, and there's more to life and more to our existence, and that's where we point to our Creator. We'll have more next week here on Faith Matters on the Talk Station, FM 107 and AM 1240. Thank Dr. Bob Wilson and Robert Cornegy for joining us here today on Faith Matters.
Thank you for joining us for Faith Matters. Email your comments, questions, and suggestions to faithmatters@thetalkstation.com.
Give me faith, trust what you say, that you're good and your love is great. I'm broken inside, I give you my life. Give me faith.
Faith Matters is a production of The Talk Station.